Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're discussing how company culture makes or breaks your teams. So, Isaac, how does company culture make a team?
In every way.
Hmm.
So this is kind of a topic that's been kind of close to my heart, especially after, working at a company, working at a few different companies and kind of analyzing the good, the bad, and the ugly of each different team, I'll say, but also how, each company kind of facilitates the way the team behaves, which facilitates the way you behave in the team. So you may like just with any group of people, there's a group of people you feel comfortable around. There's a group of people you
Mm-hmm.
might not feel as comfortable around. Or there might just be people you don't really jive with. Like you feel fine around them, but you don't really click. So you don't really kind of get into like a good conversation kind of thing. And so since we're all people, and we have those kind of same relationships at work, there are types of work cultures that are kind of typical in today's tech industry that can kind of facilitate good or bad cultures in the team as it kind of that same kind of feeling cascades down. So one easy to digest example is like if you have hustle culture at the top of the company where everyone's like, you got to go, go, go. We have to deliver, have to deliver. That generally speaking will make its way down to you. Whereas some cultures that are not as like apparent, like you might have like an internal team culture that's like we want to make sure that we trust each other, or we want to make sure that there's no ego, or want to treat each other this way or that way because that helps facilitate kind of our internal bubble. So you've got like your own bubble of the way things
Hmm.
work with your team, and then you've got like a company message that can sometimes pop that bubble or help the bubble grow.
Is the bubble necessarily a good thing? Can the bubble, the way you described it, the bubble is something good and cohesive about the team. So this team cohesive bubble, does it have to be a positive force, or could the team, like if you have a team that is a not so much a tech team, but like a sales team, definitely there are hustler teams and
Mhm.
there are more laid back teams. Can the bubble be toxic with the company influencing, trying to influence it in a positive way?
Sure. I mean, anything can backfire. You can have any kind of company message that was supposed to be positive that could backfire. And like you mentioned, a sales team, for example, might like the hustle culture, whereas a an engineering team might not like that as much. So I'm not necessarily saying one is good or bad. And the bubble itself, I like using that term bubble too because like it's kind of like almost indicative of like political bubbles where like you're
Mhm.
surprised when there's someone outside it thinking a different way. We tend to do that with people we surround ourselves with. We make these bubbles. And so you could have your own good bubble of people that are, slow paced, doing things in a decent way that's not going to burn out. And that same bubble might not work for other people. So it's definitely just like any other conversation about, good culture and relationships and people, it's going to be complicated. I don't have a cut and dry
Mhm.
answer. But the things that help teams, which will be like the kind of the first part I wanted to get into, there's certain things I've seen with teams that I've been in that helps that team enjoy each other, deliver more, not feel so antagonized sometimes.
Hmm.
So one of the first things that I noticed, or rather one of the things I noticed over time, is that having a sense of trust in your team really helps the team kind of bond. It helps you grow as a person, helps you deliver. So what I mean by sense of trust is like one of the subcategories I have here for sense of trust is being able to make mistakes. So you need to be able to make a mistake on your team, push bad code, do something dumb, and for it to be like a learning experience, not just something where people jump on you and antagonize you. So you need to trust that basically your colleagues have your back. Um,
Now, is that because that's an interesting point because I could see if you've got a team that's very high in trust, and I
mhm.
happened to see this at a place, which is why it immediately came to mind. We're like, oh yeah, yes, we trust, and bad things happen, and we trust, and we're not going to get all uptight about it. But outside the bubble, everybody was looking at this team like these people just push shit code continuously, and then they high five themselves for trusting each other and not getting upset that they've totally broken everything twice this week. And so trust becomes an excuse to not do good work. It goes
Sure.
back to the company culture where, we've got trust, and then that trust becomes a way to avoid responsibility.
That happens in bubbles. Absolutely. I've definitely seen a couple of teams do that. It's really funny. The concept of people high-fiving each other as they do terrible things is pretty, it's real. But I think that your bubble of your one team is also inside of a larger bubble of a managerial team. So you have managers that can talk and share feedback too. So the same kind of trust you have with your own colleagues, you're also going to be able to give critical feedback, constructive feedback to other people. So if you have a team, for example, that's high-fiving each other and they got great trust, they're going to have a larger team or a team above them rather of managers. And one of those managers, if there's a good sense of trust and being able to give honest feedback and know you've got your back, they're going to say, hey, look, you've got a good thing going in your team. You've built a great sense of camaraderie here. However, we think that, it looks like there's been a couple of pushes lately that have broken some things. There's so basically you have to kind of semi-burst that bubble. It still goes back to trust. You can have isolated bubbles of work, but still have oversight of those bubbles. In general, knowing your team or even your manager particularly is working in your best interest is a good way to feel like you can deliver code, be your best at the company, and knowing that there's like a sense of it's about us and not just attacking one fault, that kind of thing. Like, for example, a good manager too, if you trust your manager is out to help you, like we know the managers there, the company's paying the manager too, and we know the manager has to also get things done. So it's not just about like a yes manager that makes the person underneath the manager feel good, but a good manager will find this nice Venn diagram of, oh, I see what you need or what you want to work towards in your career, and also see something the company needs delivered. How about we have a conversation here about this kind of Venn diagram of interest? That way I can get something done for the company because that's my job, and I can help you grow in your career. So there's still that kind of sense, like, I want to be able to show up at my one-on-ones and say, hey, this is what I want. And my manager say, I think I can make that happen. And he's not just placating my fears. He's actually trying to help me make that happen. And I trust him.
So how does that work? Like, how does the overall company culture, I mean, first of all, the company, I guess, picks the manager. So that's one way that they would impact and shape the team culture. But how does the overall company culture shape how the manager works? Like, is there a lot of push with, if the leadership is saying hustle, 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 and the manager is pushing back, does that impact the team? If he's
Yeah.
able to make a bubble?
If he's able to push back, that's excellent, right? So you have certain teams that you're going to be in with the manager, they're going to be told what to do, and there's no excuses. You get this done, and they'll replace you or something like that. And that's kind of an aggressive team to be on, or company to be at, rather. There are good, like the best managers I've worked under are the ones that can say they can field all of these requests and demands and hustle culture and say, you tell me what needs to get done, and I'm going to go to my team and find out how to work with them to deliver it. It's about, like, every manager is going to know their own culture of their team and how to work with that team and how their team responds best to things. So yes, certain companies will go out of their way and say this has got to be done, and that culture at the top can affect things, but a good manager will push back and say, I hear you, we understand this needs to get done. I am a manager, you've employed me to manage people, you're going to have to trust me. I know my team better than you do, I've worked with them daily, I can make this happen, but let me get this done in a way that will not break this team.
You've described less than 50% of the managers I've worked with over the decades.
Which is sad.
Far less.
Well, also too, like there's a cliche that people don't quit their company, they quit their manager. And I feel like that's been true in almost every case. So still being able to build trust, being able to have honest feedback with somebody, or even the manager being able to be somebody who can hear you and listen to you and actually go,
Mhm.
there's sometimes there's just bad, awful people to work with. And that's something too that's like you can't really push past that, unfortunately. So you have to be able to collaborate with people, and that still requires a sense of trust. And another thing
Let's
underneath, oh, go ahead.
well, can we dig deeper on that? Because I think that's an
Sure.
interesting. I've worked with a decent number of people that I didn't like, but there's
Mhm.
been, I've been working for probably over 2 decades, and I would say there's been maybe 4 or 5 people that I actually felt hostility towards.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
right, and it was just like, oh, not even oil and water, more of like uh, oil and a lighter, where if you mix the two, it's just going to
Yeah.
explode. How does the company influence how that happens? Like what to do there?
Well, I don't know if the company can in this case, if we're talking about the company as like the overarching
Well,
presence.
the company culture, right? So if you've got
Yeah.
a company culture that's hustle,
Hmm.
and you've got two people who are combustible together, well, when you have a company that's hustle and you have two people that are combustible, the typical thing I see is you put them together until one of them combusts, and then you are left with the other. But imagine a healthier environment might approach that differently.
Yeah, I think a healthier environment. I mean, there's a couple of things you can do. There's some people that are just not going to get along well, and it's not necessarily your job to play psychologist at work. I've also not been a manager, so I can't really tell, like the best way to solve some of the people problems. But I would say from just a inherent sense of what to do in those regards, I would have conversations with those people and see if they can learn to work together, understand like what's the issue? Why are you fire and gasoline here in this case instead of oil and water? What is the trigger points here? Like let's try to figure that out. And if it's something where like they're not going to be able to work well together, well, you only have a couple of options. If one of them is being the aggressor, then they're going to have, a come to Jesus moment and talk to him, be like, look, we're not delivering, and it's because you are being aggressive in the situation and you're actually impacting the team. And that's probably an HR discussion. Um, the other one is you can also just see if you can move teams, find different little bubbles here. If people work well in their bubbles and you have people, uh, this person can work really well in a different bubble, gets really along or gets along really well with another person on their team. Maybe that's a gentle way to do it. Again, I'm not a manager in this case, but I would
So team
imagine there's only so
mobility.
much you can force. Yeah.
So bringing it back to kind of the things that a company culture, team mobility.
Hmm.
I've been at places where their teams were people were highly mobile and switched teams all the time, and I've been at places where you would have needed somebody's manager's approval to switch teams.
Yeah. Well, again, this is a problem that will solve itself. If a team continues not delivering because of an issue, it will be very apparent. So at some point, something will come down. So the
Well,
actual,
I'm gonna. So what if you have a team and you have one highly productive
Mhm.
asshole and a team full of people who are frustrated by the asshole,
Yeah.
but the leadership's like this is your 10x engineer here, to use a cliche, and
Mhm.
it's more of they're like a 15x, and you could literally get rid of the rest of the team, and it would still be more delivery than if we got rid of the asshole.
Mhm.
How does and then company culture, but whether or not they're willing to pull the trigger on that asshole, typically they're not.
Oh, well, again, I mean, it's my conversation is more about the aspect of what makes teams work well together and not work well
Okay.
together, not necessarily the decisions of what to do when they don't. So in this case, yeah, if you have a 15x engineer, which I hate how cheesy that term is, and
It's
they're
so cheesy.
actively making the rest of the team miserable, like you're going to have churn in your team. Someone's eventually going to have a breaking point and leave, and then you're going to sour the entire experience. So again, the actual things to do for those teams, I've not been in a role where I can tell you directly or give the listener the best advice in this case. All I know is that I have seen what happens, and the people leave. People get angry. People complain. There's like you don't deliver your team. I mean, yeah, there one person can deliver for the rest of the team, but in the end, other people on the team still like it's noticed that their pieces aren't being delivered. They're getting angry. They're not showing up to work. They're looking for different jobs. You're going to find you're still going to see an impact there. So
Okay.
that brings me to actually the last point here is being able to own failures at a team. You don't want a single point of failure. You don't want a 10x engineer or 15x engineer. If they're the type of person who's an asshole, like this straw man that we're inventing here, and yeah, let's say they're exceptional and they have just ego out the roof. They don't take feedback well. They don't take criticism well. I think the way they do it is the best. And they build everything. Then what happens when they leave? What happens when they're on vacation?
Mm-hmm.
We think about bus factor here. Like what happens in those cases? If they don't show up, and then the rest of the team is left to pick up and oh well, so and so is out. You have to do their work, and they haven't seen any of their work. They don't know how any of the processes work. It's a single point of failure. You create just a soured mood for the entire team because one person is too probably afraid when it comes down to it from the psychological perspective to share their experience with the team, to share their work with the team, their processes. Um, you don't want to own like you want to own every failure as a team. So if something goes wrong, it's
Mm-hmm.
not just one person's fault. And you want to own the successes of the team. You don't like, oh, this 15x engineer, thank you. Everyone bow down to this one person on the team who has carried us to the heights of heaven here. So setting up cultures like that, that's when people talk about a toxic culture, that's
Mm-hmm.
how you create it. You let someone's ego or 10x engineer, you let that sit there until they end up being that single point of failure. Because once that happens and shit hits the fan, and no one can pick up those pieces, you have tons of people on call that can't figure it out. You have people working extra. You have extra burnout. It all cascades from there.
I remember old man telling stories here. I remember being on a team once where he wasn't even anyway, a very egotistical person. And I'd been hired to reduce the bus factor from, 1 to 2. So my job was there so that if something happened, I could help keep the things running. And he viewed
Mm-hmm.
me as a threat.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
well, because he was a big egoist and he threw his weight around. His typical response when he didn't get his way was, "Well, I'm going to quit." And so the first time he heard that, I was like, "Wow, that's pretty childish." And the second time I heard him say it, I was like, "Wow, you got to fire this guy." And they didn't, and so I left the team after about 9 months. So I was like, I'm done with this
Yeah.
because there was never going to be any way I could get in because he was actively working to keep me out. Like my job was to be able to support and or replace him, and he was actively keeping me out because he didn't want me to be able to replace him because that would make him replaceable. And I remember I did my exit interview, and they're like, "Well, why are you leaving?" I'm like, "Well, you hired me to, be this guy's, counterpart and or replacement, and he views me as a threat, which I guess I get because he's a total tool. But you don't back me when it comes to actually being able to let me do my job, the job you hired me for. And so, I'm out of here. But let me tell you what's about to happen." And so I told the director, I told his manager, I told the director, and I told the CTO, I'm like, look, if you can't get this guy under control, and you can't, you either have to fire him next time he throws a tantrum, and just accept that you're going to have a terrible month, or they're going to fire you because you can't control them.
Yeah.
And within 2 months of my leaving, they were all gone. They'd all been fired because they couldn't control this guy.
That's one way to do it.
That is
Well,
that is a company culture.
yeah, that's company culture. And like you said, you left,
I
right? So
left.
like I was saying earlier, like if you're on a team where someone's just not going to get along with you, there's only so much you can do. Either you find a way to get along or you leave. Whether it's the team or the company. Um, there's not much else you can do. And actually, I was having a mentorship conversation with someone recently, and I was talking about like the idea of like team fits and company fits. And this is kind of probably something maybe hopefully someone out there needs to hear is occasionally you will be part of a team or a company that you're actually a bad fit for, and it's not your fault. Like you want to do XYZ in your career and they don't care about those things. It's
Mm-hmm.
not, the company's not bad for that. You're not a bad programmer for that or whatever your role is for that. Sometimes they're just a bad fit. And the things you want to do and the things you're interested in, the company does not care about. And it's okay to leave that company and find a company that does care about that so you can grow your career. You're not betraying the company family or any of this crazy stuff people come up with after you've been, in swept up in like a, cult of personality for a company for a while.
That there's a sign of a more mature engineer is the willingness to say, yeah, this is a bad fit. I'm out of here. Right.
With anything in your life, to be honest,
Well, yes,
knowing when
anything.
to say no, knowing when to say actually this isn't right for me, and not just kind of like torturing yourself trying to fit fit the wrong shape in the hole, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so yeah, let's pivot unless you have any other ideas there into things that hurt the teams.
Well, I don't think we brought it full circle in terms of we're trying to talk about the team dynamic. So we never defined what
Hmm.
makes a good team culture.
Hmm.
Like, or we didn't even say that we are trying for a strong team culture. We just said a strong team. Like
Hmm.
what are the properties of a strong team? You said
Got
that
it.
they're being able to make mistakes, knowing that your manager has your best interest,
Hmm.
non-judgmental code review. Like, okay, having a team where it's basically a safe space where you can, you're safe to make mistakes, you're safe to do experiments, you have support for when things go wrong. Those are all things that make a great team. We touched on some things that companies can do
Yeah.
to help or hurt those. But do we leave anything on the table about what else goes into a good team for what we're talking
Yeah.
about?
So I want to be clear too. It's not necessarily I'm saying that we just need a safe space for engineers because like you were talking about with the whole bubble of people high-fiving each other and not delivering, you still need to be challenged. And so that's why my first subcategory there was like a sense of trust. And that also goes into not just people having your back, but people being able to give you honest feedback and you trust they're giving it to you because it's valid feedback and not just something passed down from leadership or not some kind of bullshit response or whatever. Someone can come to you and say, I think you need to work on this or we need to work on that. So that way you can actually improve as a team because you do need to get checked by other teams, other people, so you can grow. It's not just a bubble in the worst sense of it, where everyone believes the same thing, because you still need that diversity of thought. And that comes from outside your team as well, right? But trust was like the overarching first category there. The other one was like we kind of got into, which is basically losing the ego. Don't have that 50 next engineer being built on your team, or being created. People aren't just hired as 50 next; they become these 50 next people who think they're all that. It's okay to lose your ego a bit, show up
Mhm.
imperfectly. So I have been this person before where I did not want to show off my code because it wasn't ready yet. Right. I wanted to show a really nice clean code and show how good I was. But I was actually my process of doing it was kind of dumb. I would add as I went through and debugged, I would just like be refreshing and like debugging a really bad way, scattering a bunch of logs in here, just like just there was a better way to do what I was doing, but I didn't want people to see the process because it didn't look good. I wanted people to see the finished product and be like, wow, look what Isaac delivered. And that's a bad way to go about things.
Mm.
Um, because if you let others see your ugly coding process, which a lot of times that's facilitated by pair programming, you can get feedback from people like, whoa, I see you're doing this way. And not just that that's stupid. Why are you doing it that way? Which would be the bad judgmental way of approaching somebody, but say, hey, I've noticed this repetitive task that you're doing here. I actually use this tool for that,
Hmm.
or I use this thing over here for that. This is my method of doing it. And if you pair with people and you toggle who's the driver of that pairing session, you get to see what other tools they use, what other processes they use, learn how they think. And then sometimes, believe it or not, other people do things better than you, or they have a better method. So you've got to drop the ego and then also learn how other people think. Let other people. This is an important one too, where even if you know better as a senior, if you see a junior do something a different way, don't say it's wrong. let them have their own experience, let them make their own mistakes, assuming it's not anything terrible, assuming it's just another solution to the problem.
Right.
Let
Something you
people
don't
do
like as
that.
much.
Yeah, maybe you don't like it as much. Don't just tear them down. Be like, oh, that's an interesting solution, because it's another creative thought. You want the diversity on your of thought on your team because you don't want everyone thinking exactly the same, having the exact same answers to the same problems. That would make a lot of your project management or your ideation, I guess is the term for it, very boring if everyone had the same ideas and the same solutions to a customer's problem. You want people to suggest whimsical things, dumb things. Like, let people have that kind of freedom to know I can suggest the first thing that comes to mind and someone's not going to tear me down for it. Or even if it's something funny, just laugh about it as a team. It's fine. So lose the ego, pair with people to learn how other people think. Pairing doesn't have to be just a programming thing. If you're a programmer, it could just be work or shadow under somebody. If you're a project manager, shadow other project managers. If you're a manager and you want to and you see how a senior manager works, shadow them. Just learn how other people think. Get outside of the context that you know best about this role. Put yourself in the learning role again.
Okay. So if you're on a team and it's a good team,
Mhm.
um, what are the or let's take that back. Let's go the other way. You're on a team and it's a bad team,
Okay.
right? There's low trust or whatnot. What are some things you can do to help improve it, to get a transformation from a bad team to a good team? I mean, obviously we covered that you could switch teams, switch companies, but if you like the company or you see hope, what are some things you can do to improve the team?
I feel like that kind of goes back to the concept of pairing.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing you need to do is get your team to communicate with each other. I think a lot of times teams don't get along, or they're bad teams, for the lack of a better word. It's because they kind of isolate into little areas of things to work on. So instead of collaborating on a new project, someone who just really wants to get it done dives in there and does it by themselves and just kind of goes into a hole. And that's fine to do. I'm not saying everyone should always be pairing with people at every moment. It's fine to
Mm-hmm.
do that. But I guess what I'm getting at is communication. Pairing is just another way of saying communicate with your team. You don't want to be a team of people that just says during stand up what you're working on, and then everyone disappears into their own holes, because then you're not
That's not a
sharing any of that
team.
knowledge. That's not a team. It's just like a loose collection of people tied together by a daily stand up, right?
Right.
So that would be the first thing. Communicate. And in communicating, by default, this is going to happen in any communicating group of people in the world. There's going to be people who agree and disagree with what you've said. And that's fantastic, because now you're learning a little bit about what other people think, like their decisions, why they're coming to oh, I've seen this before, this is why I'm hyper vigilant in this regard. You're like, okay, I see what you're coming from here. Maybe that's not the same case here. And you have a big discussion. You start learning about how your colleagues think. You start empathizing with them as they come to you with their experiences and why they make their decisions. Communication in general, just learn who you're working with. Um, that's probably step one. Uh, Step two is, as you're doing that, and again, this is going to also kind of lay the groundwork for you, is as
Mm-hmm.
you start working with people, you're going to start empathizing with them and you're going to want them to succeed in their role, right? You're going
Mm-hmm.
to, like, if there's anything that goes wrong as your team after you become a team, it's just like you can imagine, like when you have like a squad in the military or something, and they're all like a band of brothers and whatnot. As you kind of build that camaraderie in your team, if something goes wrong, it's not just your fault. It's the squad's fault, so to speak. It's the team's fault. So you're going to end up working, like, especially as you start including people. Like, again, if you're in your own bubble, you don't include people even in your own code reviews. You might try to just like sneak stuff in. You want to tag people in for peer review, for code review. And if people approve that and sign off on that, then it's the team is owning that success or a failure as a group, because they all signed off on it. So you want to communicate, you want to build trust with your team, learn who you're working with, empathize with them, understand their decisions, and then whenever things go wrong, have their back. Be that same person that you'd want for you if something went wrong and you knew it was your MR that merged that broke production. Someone come in
That
like,
never
oh, that
happens
was
to
us.
me
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah, there's the first two. Another is don't break that trust for a bad team. I've definitely, and I'm not joking when I say this, I've had a manager before where I've confided a one-on-one about, oh, these are my concerns, these are things I'm working on, these are things in my career that I'm worried about. Here are my colleagues that I'm having trouble working along with. And they've gone and told other people my personal one-on-ones to other people, and kind of broke that trust around them. So like I knew that if I confided in this person, my concerns would end up being scattered across other people. Or even if I had criticisms of people on my team that I was like trying to figure out how to work with somebody, they would just go and blab to the other person about it. That's not a great situation. You've broken the trust in that regard. I can't come to you and be my honest self because I know that you're going to tell it to anybody else, rather than it being like a confidential thing. I can't be really honest about my feedback with somebody because I know another person's going to be hearing it, and it's not just you.
I once had a highly overreactive manager, and I confided in him how frustrated I was by somebody. He's like, "Well, then let's just fire him." I was like, "Whoa, let's not go
Right.
that. That is not.
A little
This
too
guy
far.
needs coaching, not firing."
Maybe they
But
came from a company where they had to keep doing that to people. A bad
and
culture.
at that point, I couldn't confide in the guy anymore. I'm like, I have no idea how off the handle you're going to go off of anything I say.
Yeah.
Uh, and I am one to speak in hyperbole, which it's just going to make things much, much worse.
Or what was our main question here? It's just ways teams are bad.
Ways that you can transform your teams.
Transform teams. Yeah.
Right. So it's building the trust is the way to transform a bad team to be better.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like breaking the trust is a way to take a good team and throw it in the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like everything we're saying is around trust.
Yeah, well, a ton of it is around trust for sure. However, the main company culture, so to speak, of like things like hustle and grind culture can also be something that can break the team, even if the team trusts themselves. So pushing people until they break turns out is not very sustainable. Right. So, and this is going to sound interesting, I guess, but one of the ways that you can actually help prevent, well, I guess we can still dive into the hustle grind culture part. The manager should be somebody still fielding some of these requests that come in that are like pushing people to hustle, right? And so that can only happen if you like they're providing the shield for you. As engineers, you still have to go in and write, now that you've had time bought for you and you can deliver in a sustainable way that's not going to burn you out, you still have to code quality code that's code you would be willing to commit and know that it's going to not ruin the lives of your coworkers should you have to disappear. So you still have to be thoughtful in how you deliver your own code, and consider, like, even if like the faster you deliver code and the faster you're pushed to deliver code, the buggier it's going to be. You're not going to think about it as much. You're going to miss a couple of things. You're going to miss some edge cases. You're going to miscommunicate because you're in a rush. And then that code, when it fails, someone has to be on call to fix it, especially if it's very important. So that when that happens, someone's on call, they work extra hours than they anticipated. That ruins their next day because they worked longer, or depending on the nature of the disaster, could cause much more than just a couple of hours of work. So that's going to cascade too. So that hustle and grind culture, I understand what people say when we read these colorful LinkedIn posts about, I did this today. I woke up at 4 a.m. I got that. I got this, all this stuff done. You got to hustle, you got to grind to get things done. And that's why I'm a millionaire. You see all these kind of things like that.
I don't see those in mine.
Oh my gosh.
I must not follow the right, or you must follow the wrong people because
I must.
I don't see
No,
that.
no. It is not just a my feed LinkedIn meme. It's like there's subreddits about like how cringeworthy some of these posts are. It's a thing for sure.
The one I get a lot is the father tells his daughter to sell the car to like a used car shop and like collectors, blah blah blah. You know, it's trying to talk to the value of specialization. And I read it, I'm like, God, this guy's a shitty father.
I haven't seen that one. All right. Another interesting thing that I've noticed is documentation is incredibly important to the culture of teams. I know it sounds kind of interesting or silly, but or maybe I'm wording this kind of colorfully when I say it this way, but I think every day you don't have documentation for either your feature or a process that you do, you're like actively hurting your team. So I'm gonna put that powerful statement out there because you
I
put
used to call it a
unnecessary.
tax.
Oh yeah, go
Not
ahead.
writing documentation is a tax on the future members of your team. Like, oh, I don't need to write documentation. If somebody has a question, they can just ask me. No, no, no. Asking is a tax.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Um, and not just on the team, but your future self, because you may
Mm-hmm.
end up having a process that you learned, and then you move away from that process. Then 3 months down the line, somebody comes back to you and it's like, "Hey, can you get this done?" You're like, "Ah, shoot!" And you kind of forgot your own process because you knew pieces of it, but not the full thing. And then you spend a lot of rediscovery time relearning that process that you could have just documented the first time and saved time for everybody.
I do that all the time. I write down the process in on the wiki, and then people are like, "How do you do this?" I'm like, I think I wrote it down." And I'm like, "Let's follow the steps." It's like, sweet, I did it right. It
There you
worked.
go. It's similar to adding a README to your code base. Like if you just have like pushed up code on GitHub and someone's like, "Here's my project," and you don't know how to like install it or set it up after you clone it down, like someone has to dig through your code and figure it out, and that's just a pain. So the same thing with like a team, like with earlier when we were talking about like a single point of failure, you don't want that like bus factor.
Mm-hmm.
You're still doing this. You're doing something similar if you know a process at your company and you're the only one or one of the only ones who knows it. And especially if it's not written down, when you're gone, what do other people do? They have to do the same discovery work. You end up like not just putting pressure on your team to do your work that you were the one doing when you're gone, but also you're slowing down the team from other deliverables and slowing down your project's deliverables and eventually the company's deliverables. Is like these things that the tax eats away piece by piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your future self will thank you. Your friends, your colleagues will thank you. Document your processes, especially the ones that are really strange processes or like very complex ones that only you know how to do. Drop the ego with job security. Document it. Share what you're doing. It's going to make everyone's lives a lot easier.
Yeah, one an early manager had a great saying that's always worth keeping in mind. Not exactly a teamwork thing, but he said, "If you can't be fired, you can't be promoted either."
Interesting.
It's like if there's stuff that only you know how to do, yes, that gets you some job security, but it also they can't promote you. How would they promote you? Nobody knows how to do what you do.
That is a hilarious double-edged sword I've never considered.
Mm.
That's a good one. All right, what's next on our list here?
Well, so we've been talking about teams, what makes them good or bad, and how company culture can impact that. And then the next thing we wanted to talk about was signs that the winds are changing. Like, so you're on a
Mhm.
good team and it's looks like it's going to start going bad, or you're on a bad team, and hey, maybe it's getting better, and so you should stick around because it's on the upswing.
Mhm.
So, what kind of things bring that massive, or what are signs of change that you should be paying attention to if you're on a team, especially a bad team?
Mhm.
What would you be looking for when you're trying to decide, do I stay or do I go? Because if you stay, there could be
Yeah.
trouble, but if you go, it could be double.
Oh my God, Jeffrey. Okay. Well, okay. My answer for this, geez. I'm hoping for a little bit of insight from you from this, because I know in my role, I've been kind of heads down, and I feel like I've getting caught in the current a few times and not been able to see the bigger picture and see the winds of change. But I have noticed some interesting patterns, I guess. And one of them is kind of not super relevant, I guess, or
Hmm.
maybe it is. But I have noticed that once your company starts making a lot of money, uh, there does tend to seem to be a little bit of corruption in the process. I feel like teams get spun up randomly. People get moved around for brand new projects that the new head of product has dreamed up that was just hired. You see like a huge shift in company culture immediately when there's a lot of money coming in. And I've seen at least two companies where teams and cultures got kind of ruined really fast after a bunch of money started rolling in. Um,
That's the scale up period. So you have
mhm,
some company, in the startup period, you are highly cash constrained and you're limited to building off of the things that are most important and most necessary to get going. And then at some point you hit the inflection, either
mhm.
you get a ton of venture capital based off of what they think you're going to do, or you're just making money, right? You've got that product market fit and you're making money, and the money's rolling in. And so they go on a hiring spree because they want to go public. And they're like, that's known to obliterate company culture and sinks many companies. The scale up period where they start growing for the sake of an exit.
Mm.
So they say, oh well, we need to be we're making $100 million a year. We're $100 million company now, or we're making $30 million a year. We're $100 million company now. Our early investors want to get their money out, so we need to be $1 billion company. So we need to 10x everything. So we're going to hire a lot of people to drive revenue, and that will destroy culture in an instant. Um, and the number one way, I guess, the number one wind of change is new managers, new
Yeah,
directors, new manager. Like anybody new above you is going to have a massive impact on company culture because they're going to come in and almost everyone is going to try and change things for what
hmm,
they see is better, but it will be a change. And it may be better, right? If things are bad, many times the people they bring in will make things better. Many times they're just going to make things different, which may be worse for you, and depending upon where you are and how you like things.
hmm.
The other thing that's going to happen is they're going to just start hiring lots of people. And when you're trying to hire lots of people, you start hiring you hire more for skills and less for personality. How would a manager who's been on the job for a month know if somebody is going to be a bad fit on their team?
That's a really good point. Yeah, you end up being looser because of so much pressure to hire and grow. You get looser with who you hire and seeing if they actually fit your company culture, and then they don't, and they end up kind of shaking things up a bit.
Right. And just the sheer number of people will dilute the company culture of whatever it was. If you
Hmm.
have a 100-person company and you hire one new person a month, right, that's a 12% annual growth rate. If you are trying to hire 100 people in that year, that's 100% growth rate. Those 100 new people are going to, you're going to have it's just like snow globe. You're going to throw it all in the air, and who knows what kind of company you're going to
Yeah,
have at the end because you don't have that steady, slow thing of teaching people how we do it here. And again, that can be good or
yeah.
bad depending upon how things are today, but it's definitely winds of change.
That kind of goes back to my conversation on trust too, because that reminds me of in a previous role, I had 10 managers across 4 years,
Mm.
and some of them shifting faster towards the later years. And it happened so frequently that I wasn't able that there was no trust that my team would be the same. They would shuffle managers. They would decide, oh, we're going to do this with this team. We're going to move these people to this team. And if you can't trust that the same product situation or people are going to be there the next day because of how much the company's growing, then it's also kind of hard to deliver or be focused on one particular outcome because you're like, well, you can almost see it becoming a joke. Oh, well, tomorrow we'll have somebody else and we're going to go a different direction. Because, like you said, there's change, but just because somebody's moving doesn't necessarily mean they're moving in the right direction. It's like this illusion again, this illusion of progress because they've changed this. team as they see fit because they just came in, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good change yet. And you can't really understand there's a pattern if your team shifts so frequently that you can't. It's almost like measuring velocity from a sprint perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have to. It still takes like 6 months to get a good understanding of what your normal deliverable rate is, what your velocity rate is, and if your team keeps shifting every month, then your velocity gets screwed up. You can't really measure anything.
No, I never thought of it. Yeah, I mean, velocity, it's very much in my mind, it's a nonsense metric. But you would need if it was going to have some validity, you would definitely need to have months and months of everybody on the team being the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I rarely see that.
Right. So even if you think velocity itself is a nonsense metric, just the concept of some kind of measurable pace in general is what I'm getting after. You can't have a measurable pace if your pace is unpredictable and random depending on the people you surround yourself with, and those people change frequently. You'll never know how far you're going to get because you're rated. It's like wildly bumping up and down the miles per hour on your treadmill. When will I be there? I don't really know.
Yeah. Are you going to leave the settings alone? No? Well, then who knows?
Right.
And if you find yourself in a state where the winds of change are blowing hard, and you want to stick it out, which isn't always a given, it's good to keep the end goal of what you want in mind. Not, oh well, this team had a manager and the manager broke the trust.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you want to get to a state where you can trust the manager. So changing managers is good in that case, right? If the winds have blown a new manager your way, great. Maybe this is a person that can be trustworthy because they've blown the old one away. You've brought in new teammates. That gives you, if you've got a relatively low amount of trust upon a team, bringing in somebody new, that immediately gives you the ability to start building trust with that person because you don't have the baggage of the past. And everyone can do that. And if you can get some of the people, let's say half the people are very working towards trust, and the other half are just solo cowboys. Any new person gives you an opportunity to try and shake up the culture again. The other thing you should do is keep your steps small. Like any changes you want to make, you have to keep them small so that they're easy to implement, and also makes them low risk so that they're easy to abandon. If you want to start, there's a new hire and you're going to pair with this person every day, and you want somebody to pair with this person every day, all day. Okay, you're only doing it with the new person as an experiment for this new onboarding technique or whatnot. It's easy to stop pairing and just stop doing it. You're not saying, oh no, everybody on the team is going to pair all day, every day from now on. It's right. We're going to do it with this one person. It's an experiment. It's a small change because it's only one person on the team. And you need a way to measure progress. This is something that I found is a corrosive effect on a high-performing team. I've been on several high-performing teams where we switched to kind of a Kanban style. We're just going to work on the most important stuff, and we're not going to have sprints, and we're not, and it's continuous delivery. So we do a story, we release the story, we move on to the next highest story. And we end up in this long now, this eternal now of, oh, well, we're just working. And because we lose sight of the progress. Because we never stop and celebrate, oh, well, what did we do in this last sprint? Well, we're not sprinting.
I see.
And so we don't track things like, oh, well, how many stories have we released? What new things in the last quarter have gone out? Where were we 6 months ago? Versus what, like a common one that people like to track is how much time are we spending fighting bugs 6 months ago versus how much time are we spending now?
Right.
But if you don't track that stuff and stop and look back, you're just in this current now. Oh, well, there's still bugs. We're still working bugs. We haven't made any progress. But if you look back, you're like, oh, whoa, last year this time we were doing 50% bugs. Now we're at a third of our time is on bugs. That's huge progress. But there's still a lot of bugs. And so that incremental change, you lose it if you aren't measuring and watching for it.
Got you. You don't want to use velocity to measure your progress? I'm just kidding.
You could use velocity, but I mean, how about acceleration and deceleration?
Yeah. Yeah, the progress is a big one for me because like I like seeing what I've built and taking pride in what I've built. And if I'm constantly in a state of motion to where I'm just working and not reflecting on what I've built or like maybe even like how customers are enjoying the products, um, then I can see myself getting either burned out or just kind of losing sight of the big picture and just kind of like being in this weird factory kind of phase where I'm just like, here's the thing in front of me, tink, 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 next. And it's like churning out stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to step back and take a look around.
Well, all right. Any other last thoughts here before we wrap this up?
I'd like to make an appeal for guests. If you have been in a rewrite recently, or you're thinking about a rewrite, or you even had a successful rewrite, we would love to talk to you, especially if you've been involved in a successful rewrite. Uh, I've rarely ever seen that. And I'd love to hear about your experience. Um, other than that, thanks for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.